So it's funny how some nicknames just don't match up with the city involved. I mean, you got yourself some names that just don't make sense. Like in the in Major League Baseball, it's like, the Braves in Atlanta. Like, you know, Atlanta's not really known for being good with Native Americans. For hockey, you got yourself, you know, the Nashville Predators. Well, it's like Sabretooth in Nashville, although they did find that Sabretooth thing in 1971. Like, there are names that don't make sense. Like the Flyers for Philadelphia. Why Flyers? In football, you got names that don't make sense, such as the Carolina Panthers. Like, Panthers in South Carolina? Not really. But for all it's worth, the NBA has two major examples. One, the LA Lakers playing being called the Lakers, even though that their former home was Minneapolis, home of 1,000 lakes, and yet Los Angeles doesn't have a natural lake. And of course the Jazz, because the Utah Jazz play, yes, but they used to be the New Orleans Jazz, and Jazz in Utah, not really with the Church of Latter-day Saints. But nevertheless, we got ourselves a barn burner. This is the story of the 1995 Utah Jazz. We're playing basketball sims. We're playing basketball sims. He's playing what if NBA? Cutter's doing what if NBA? Yeah. Oh, all the teams around the world got to know that the Raptors are number one. But what about the Bulls, Wizards, and Pistons? They all have great what ifs. What is stories about old teams like the Kansas City Kings and maybe even the Minneapolis Lakers. But we all know we're gonna do some basketball. He's doing basketball. He's doing basketball. What ifs? Cutter's doing what if NBA? So what if NBA? So the whole story with the Jazz franchise starts not in Utah, but in New Orleans. That's right. New Orleans have had some boondoggles for NBA teams, like the Hornets franchise being in New Orleans and then having to move a few years to Oklahoma City because of Hurricane Katrina. And then the Hornets became the Pelicans, and then the Hornets name went back to Charlotte, changing their name from the Wildcats to the Hornets and keeping their stats and all that stuff. I've talked about New Orleans a couple times. So yes, it's all about New Orleans. They wanted a team, NBA team, and they got an NBA team. They did have an ABA team, the Pelicans. Nevertheless, or the Buccaneers, but nevertheless, the Jazz were good. They they were okay, but they had only one key ingredient, and his name was Pete Maravich, one of the greatest scorers in NCAA basketball history. And New Orleans rode Pete Maravich to stardom. After all, he did go to LSU. So anyway, New Orleans knew what they had to do. But unfortunately, bad attendance, bad teams, everything crashed, and then they sold the team to Utah. It was like, why would the state of Utah want an NBA franchise? It just doesn't make sense. Of course, Pistol Pete left the Jazz before he left for Utah. And no, he did not die in the 1970s as people think he did. He died in 1987. But anyway, Pistol Pete was gone. The Jazz had to rebuild. They had to go to Utah. And for years, they would have Sidney Green being their main guy. There were a couple of missteps. Of course, Utah made a bold move in 1988, hiring this guy by the name of Jerry Sloan, who is remembered for being a member of the University of Evansville basketball team that saw a lot of their players actually get decimated due to a plane crash. And fortunately, Sloan was not on the plane at the time. So, nevertheless, Jerry Sloan would be there and help Utah for 2 decades, helping them through the highs, and the lows, including 2 trips to the NBA Finals in 1997 98. Of course, we'll talk about the 95 season in Paradox, but then 1997, Utah faced Houston in a famous conference finals that saw a a winning shot by was it Williams? Eddie Williams for Houston. Somebody named Eddie for Houston scored a late second shot. But then in Game 6, Utah and Houston were tied. John Stockton somehow was left alone on the inbound pass, catches Stockton for 3 hits. John Stockton has sent the Utah Jazz to the NBA Finals in what is probably Greg Gumbel's famous call RIP. But the fact of the matter is the Jazz got to the NBA Finals, fell to the Bulls in 5 thanks to 2 game-winning shots by Steve Kerr and Michael Jordan. The Jazz persisted and won in the Western Conference, going to the finals in '98, unfortunately being victimized by Jordan's shove of Brian Russell. Call it what you want, but I think he shoved them. The Jazz have had names like Darren Williams, Andre Kirilenko, and Gordon Hayward pass by. They've had a few trips to the NBA semifinals, but have never been to the NBA finals after, other than '97 and '98. So anyway, let's take a look at a famous Jazz team that should have done well, and that's the 1995 team. So anyway, the Jazz, this was their 21st season in the NBA and 16th season in Salt Lake City. The Jazz were picked up Adam Keefe from Atlanta, the former Stanford thing. They actually struggled. They were 14-1 in January, which was pretty good, and they were 22 games below 500 at the All-Star break. At midseason, they decided to trade Jay Humphries to Boston for Blue Edwards. And it worked out. The Jazz won 60 games and would be second in the Midwest, or third in the Western Conference. This was the year John Stockton became the all-time assist leader, passing Magic Johnson, and got his 8th straight assist title. Karl Malone and Tom Chambers both beat the 20,000-point mark. Karl Malone, famous for being with Utah all his career, except for one solitary season with the Lakers when they needed a super team, whereas John Stockton stayed with the Jazz. Tom Chambers, former Suns icon. Malone and Stockton were selected for the All-Star game, and Malone would be third in MVP voting. Jeff Hornacek would put on some good scoring off the bench with David Benoit and Felton Spencer. In the first round, the Jazz were up on the Houston Rockets, who were the defending NBA champions in the best of 5. So all the Jazz needed to do was win one game, especially Game 5 at home, but they didn't. Houston would go on to make a Cinderella run and win the NBA Finals. Tom Chambers went to play overseas, and Blue Edwards was picked by Vancouver in the expansion draft. They only had one pick in the '94 draft. They work out. So they had David Benoit, Walter Bond, oh, Mr. Bond, Anton Carr, Tom Chambers, the legend from Utah, well, from the University of Utah and from the Suns. John Crotty, James Donaldson, the 7'2" center. Blue Edwards, Jeff Hornacek, Adam Keefe, Karl Malone, Byron Russell, Felton Spencer, John Stockton, and Jamie Watson. They won 60 games. They were second in their division to the Spurs. So they would be second in the conference, but unfortunately, they would end up being the 3 seed because Phoenix won the other division, and the rules were that, the team, the winners of each division would be 1-2. So the Jazz would have been the 2 seed and faced Portland instead of Houston. So Denver would face San Antonio as an 8 seed and never failed to do what they did the previous year. Portland would fall to Phoenix. Houston would beat up on Utah, and I believe it was the Lakers who took down the Spurs in the semifinals. I can't remember, but yeah, they were looking pretty good for themselves. They beat Houston in game 1, got crushed in game 2, won game 3 in Houston. They needed to win game 4, but they couldn't do it. And then game 5 on home turf, Carmelo put up 35 points, but they still lost 95-91. So yeah, Donaldson, Benoit, Hornacek, Stockton, Malone for the playoffs. It just seemed empty for the Utah Jazz. After all, Houston should never have gone past the first round. Nevertheless, we will roll the dice and see how things go with the Jazz. All right, so we have ourselves the 95 Jazz would have faced the 95 Suns. Now, as I said, the Suns were a better playoff team than Utah, based on the fact that they won the division. Utah did not. So that's why Phoenix is ahead of Utah in a sense. And of course, the NBA, unlike the NHL and MLB and NFL for that matter, don't reseed. So the winner of the 2-7 matchup would face the winner of the 3-6 no matter what. Of course, as of this taping, the 2025 Western semis have Golden State and Minnesota playing. But the thing is, Golden State's the 7 seed, and Minnesota's the 6 seed. By regular standards, Golden State should be playing Oklahoma City, and Denver should be playing Minnesota, but not so fast. So anyway, Utah starts in Phoenix and all that, and that's where Tom Chambers used to play. First game sees a close one, but the Suns win 113-111. Karl Malone, player of the game, 35 points. Yeah, Hornacek with 6, John Stockton 19, Benoit with 12, Felton Spencer with 4. And the bench of James Donaldson and Keith Blue Edwards, John Crotty, Walter Bond, and Jamie Watson. For the Suns, their starters, Dan Marley, Charles Barkley, Sir Charles, KJ, Danny Manning, and Danny Ainge. Doing their jobs, the bench of Wesley Person, Elliot Perry, Joe Klein, Suey, former Arkansas, Razorback, Danny Shades, AC Green, remember him, and Trevor Ruffin. Game 2 sees the Jazz win on Phoenix's turf as Karl Malone put up 20.17 rebounds, proving why he's an icon. There's Byron Russell. There's Tom Chambers playing 3 minutes with Anton Carr and Jay Humphries. Phoenix with Richard Dumas, who was a good player, but unfortunately drugs just ruined his career. Antonio Lane, former Duke star, and Wayman Tisdale from Oklahoma. 18 from Charles Barkley. Yeah, they had Danny Manning. Surprise. So 1-1 headed to game 3. And in Utah, it would be the Jazz winning the game. Karl Malone, 21 points, 9 rebounds. KJ Berkeley and Manning with 20 points. Wesley Person, 14 points. Love it. Anyway, 22 from Stockton, 21 from Malone. The bench wasn't that bad. Game 4 would see the Jazz do it again. The Jazz are up 3-1. Karl Malone, 33 points, 13 rebounds. Yeah, Karl Malone would know how to stop the Suns and all that. 20 points from Dan Marley. Everyone scored 10 points. Trevor Ruffin scored 15 points in 12 minutes. Are you nuts? Adam Keefe scored 11 points in 15 minutes. Katie. Game 5 in Phoenix. It is 2-2-1-1-1, by the way. And it would be the Jazz winning as Karl Malone, 20 points, 10 rebounds. The Suns had one game behind them, but the Jazz just crushed them the rest of the way. 20 from Karl, 20 from Benoit. 12 points from Walter Bond in 12 minutes. Danny Ainge only scored 3 points the entire game. Well, nevertheless, the Jazz took care of the Suns. Now we have to change the home team because the San Antonio Spurs are the Western Division winners. Went to the Western Finals against Houston. So it's San Antonio versus Utah for Game 1. And in Game 1, it would be the Spurs with David Robinson, the Admiral, 24 points, 13 rebounds. Hornacek would only score 8 points. Felton Spencer, the high-scoring forward, 19. Malone only had 14. The Spurs, David Robinson, the Admiral, Avery Johnson, Sheldon Elliott, known for getting a kidney transplant and still playing. Dennis Rodman, when he was with the Spurs before he went to the Bulls. And then Feli Del Negro. We have Willie Anderson, Terry Cummings, former Milwaukee Star, Doc Rivers, yes, that coach, Doc Rivers, J.R. Reed from UNLV, and Chuck Person, former Indiana Star, being there too. Game 2 would see the Jazz think to win, but David Robinson does his job, and that would put the Spurs up 2-0. Malone did put up 28 points, pretty good. Walter Bond, 12 points off the bench. 31 from Sean Elliott. So Utah goes home down 2-0. And in Game 3 on home turf, they win again. Karl Malone does his job on home turf. Sean Elliott puts up 16. Willie Anderson, 11 points. There's Howard Isley. Former Jazz. Corey Crowder, Chris Wendy, Moses Malone. He played for the 95 Spurs? Really? That guy? And Jack Haley. Eh. The Jazz with their 1 minute guys. Oh, yeah. Tom Chambers. Game 4 sees the Jazz go to overtime, but lose in double overtime. David Robinson, 31 points, 12 rebounds. Robinson, 49 minutes. Avery, 48. Elliott, 46. Rodman, 43 minutes. And Delnegro, 41. Well, Rodman put up 21 rebounds. Well, instead of freaking Rodman, they only used 5 people. They only used 10 players. Cummings, Rivers, Anderson, Person, and Reed off the bench. But yeah, that's huge. The Jazz used 6 guys off the bench. Malone, 44 minutes. Hardenchak, 44. Felton, 42. Stockton, 39. Benwell, 38. But yeah, Malone put up 42 points. So it's 3-1. Oh, yes, that's right. 3-1. Can the Jazz pull off the comeback? The answer is no. As David Robinson puts up 39 points, and the San Antonio Spurs crushed the Utah Jazz's hopes and dreams in 5 games. The Spurs would have faced the Magic in the playoffs. David versus Shaq. 31 from Carmelo. 39 from David Robinson. So anyway, the Spurs would have crushed the Jazz in the Western Finals, but at least Utah got to the Western Finals. And with Malone and Stockton before they were really good. Anyhow, I'm going to do.